Hi there. I apologize for the extremely unprofessional format of this video. Some of you know who I had last semester. I had a herniated disc injury, and I wish that I had a cool story for how I got it, but I don't. I was literally just turning sideways to take a picture of an animal, and there you go. So, some days it's better or worse than others, and today it's giving me trouble. So that I can get this information to you, I am recording this from my bed and showing you pictures on my screen. And I'm sure that you're just madly impressed with the level of technological wizardry that you are getting from this class, which you are paying for, and I apologize for that. But I figure it's better than not getting your material at all. So, in addition to the PowerPoint that you just looked at, I just wanted to give you a couple of specific Wordsworth poems that I thought were interesting and talk about how they connected to his life. Normally, we would be doing like all these kind of activities with Wordsworth and with Coleridge and a lot of in-class stuff. So this is just kind of the information that you need about him, and I apologize for us not being able to do kind of the fun parts. One kind of a gossipy, like hot tea type of thing. This is an excerpt from a book by, as you can see there, Jerome McGann and Lucy Sarah Roberts, called Byron and Romanticism. That is basically about how Byron and Wordsworth, without Byron's knowledge, were enemies. Wordsworth really, really hated him. And Byron would kind of like lightly jibe at him because they disagreed on political things. And so he would call him Turdsworth. But like it wasn't anything like serious, like calm down, Jamal, don't get the 9. Like it wasn't a big deal. Wordsworth hated Byron. He thought that Byron made the rest of them look bad and that he was a complete degenerate, which, I mean, kind of was, and that his poetry was a doggerel, that it was immoral and vicious, and so he actually perpetuated a bunch of attacks against Byron in the newspapers because Wordsworth was very famous and very well loved and very well connected, and he actually participated in the kind of wave of negativity that prevented Byron from ever being able to come back home. And as this author says, Byron certainly did not know about that because he would have addressed it if he did. But Byron's kind of thoughts on Wordsworth were, our different parties make us fight so shy, I ne'er mistake you for a personal foe, our difference is political. So Byron was just like, hey, we disagree on politics, but I still recognize you as an incredible poet and one of the romantics and somebody to be revered. And Wordsworth was basically like, I would gouge out your eyeballs with my thumbs if I could do it. It was a really weird, like, Mean Girls type of situation. That's just some tea about the poets for people like Madison who might want that information. But a couple of poems that we wanted to talk about, just short ones. Surprised by Joy, and another one called It is a Beauteous Evening, Calm and Free. I'm going to post both of these in this Edmodo post, so if you want to pull it up and be looking at it without my shaking hands. And again, sorry for having to do this from bed. So Surprised by Joy is actually about his daughter who died. It mentioned in the PowerPoint that he had several kids. He loved having children. He was a great father, with the exception of one child, which we'll talk about in a minute. But one of his daughters passed away, and it really, really messed with him. And so it starts out by saying, surprised by joy, impatient as the wind, I turn to share the transport. Oh, with whom but thee, long buried in the silent tomb? That spot which no vicissitude can find. Now, I don't know if you've ever been through this, and I don't want to trigger any sad memories, but essentially this is about this particular facet of grief that we maybe don't talk about a whole lot, which is where you see something that makes you happy, and you want to tell the person about it, and then you remember that they're dead, or you remember that they dumped you and they're not around anymore. It's that kind of situation with your consciousness where your brain hasn't really fully caught up with what's happening, and you're like, oh, I found a bird on the windowsill, Grandma would have liked that, and then you can't tell Grandma because Grandma's gone. So, Surprised by Joy, it's about how you're so sad and so down about everything that happens, And it's that kind of brutal moment where you remember, oh yeah, I was sad because this person's dead or because this person's no longer in my life. Love, faithful love, recalled thee to my mind, but how could I forget thee? Through what power, even for the least division of an hour, have I been so beguiled as to be blind to my most grievous loss? And he's kind of beating himself up there. Like, I know that I'm exhausted. I know I've got, 4 other kids to raise, but how, even for a millisecond, could I forget that you were dead? But it happens. It really does. It happens to me just as much with, like, breakups as it's happened with deaths. Like, you kind of have to remind yourself, like, oh yeah, I'm dumped. I can't share this cool comic or meme that I found with this person because he no longer wants me around. And then the end, that thought's return was the worst pang that sorrow ever bore, save one only, when I stood forlorn, knowing my heart's best treasure was no more, that neither present time nor years unborn could to my sight that heavenly face restore. He says, that moment when I found something really cool and wanted to show it to you and then remembered that you were dead, that's the second worst moment in my life. And the worst moment in my life is when you died. Is when I stood there forlorn, knowing that you were gone, looking at your tomb, and when I realized I'm never going to see that face again. So it's pretty heavy. And it's just about grief and the process of grieving and how it doesn't all happen at once. And sometimes it can take months. It can take a year. It can take longer for you to really, really have it sink in that this person is gone. Now, the other poem is actually about another daughter that he had named Caroline. So a little bit of, which I think is hilarious that he was so hard on Byron, but a little bit of backstory about Wordsworth. In the PowerPoint, it talks about how he went on a big, walking tour of Europe. And that was a thing that a lot of the Romantics did. Not even just the poets. It was like, take a gap year. We're going to take a gap year and, backpack Europe. And, I mean, people still do that. And so he did that. And when he went to France, he had himself a good time. And he had him some hoes. And he was, really, sowing his wild oats down there. So I just think it's hysterical that he's like, oh, Byron is terrible. But he was kind of doing half the same thing. And he met this woman named, I was just going to show you, Annette Vallon. And there is actually a book that's been written about Annette Vallon and this really interesting life that she lived, because she not only was Wordsworth's mistress and baby mama, but witnessed the entire French Revolution. And so she herself has had a really interesting life, and so I'm going to add that to my Audible list. But he meets Annette Vallon. He has a child by Annette Vallon, and by all occasions, for everything I can tell, was planning on marrying her. But then the French Revolution happened, and he had to get the heck out. So he left. She was still, writing him all the time and writing Dorothy, but he couldn't come back, and so they just never got married. And basically circumstances pulled them apart. So, meanwhile, she's raising this child of his, which he did acknowledge, and she carried his last name. But he never got to see her. He didn't get to see her until she was, 5 or 6 because of the war. And in the meantime, it's kind of awkward, and, him and his sister Dorothy go to Calais to meet this woman and her child for a month, and he gets down there and he's like, I've actually decided to marry this childhood sweetheart of mine who I've fallen in love with, and I'm not going to marry you, but I just kind of wanted to see my daughter. And Annette is like, okay, I guess, handled the situation with a lot of grace as far as I was concerned. But so this poem is about that first time that he meets his daughter and all of the anxiety that he has going into that encounter, because he doesn't know how she's going to react, because he's kind of been this absentee father. He was visiting her in Calais, so to give you an idea of what Calais looks like, it's kind of on the northern part of France, and it's got these cliffs, and from some parts of Calais, you can actually look over the English Channel, and you can see England. But they're walking on these cliffs here, just to set the scene for you, and here's the beautiful ocean. And it starts out, as a true romantic would, with this description of nature. It is a beauteous evening, calm and free. The holy time is quiet as a nun, breathless with adoration. The broad sun is sinking down in its tranquility. The gentleness of heaven broods o'er the sea. So, again, typical romantic. We start by talking about the loveliness of nature, particularly sunsets. there's nothing like watching the sunset from the beach. I don't know about you, but in this one regard, I am the most basic bitch on the planet because all I want to be is on a beach with a Corona watching the sunset. That's it. That's pretty much like as happy as I'm ever going to get. Or swimming with like dolphins and fish around. That's it. That's all I really want in life. So pretty much everybody likes a sunset. Sunrises kind of suck because you have to get up early for that. But I don't know anybody who does not enjoy a sunset, and that's how this poem starts. But it contrasts, the peacefulness of the sunset contrasts with what's coming next. Listen, the mighty being is awake, and doth with his eternal motion make a sound like thunder, everlastingly. The eternal motion being the waves and this kind of churning imagery of like chaos that the sound of the waves brings up. And that kind of evokes how he feels in his heart, because he is very tumultuous right now. He is scared. He's like, I don't know how this kid's going to react to me. I don't know if she's going to be like, get out, I never want to see you again. Is she going to love me? Are we going to get along? And then he turns to her and says, Dear child, dear girl, that walkest with me here, if thou appear untouched by solemn thought, thy nature is not therefore less divine. Thou liest in Abraham's bosom all the year, and worshipst at the temple's inner shrine, God being with thee when we know it not. And so we have to remember Wordsworth, and it talks a little bit about this in the PowerPoint. There's a poem about the immortality of the soul from Tintern Abbey. Wordsworth believed that basically the human soul kind of gets recycled. Like, that you die, and then you go back up to whatever God is or whatever heaven is, and he didn't have a traditional view of that. And then you come back down, and then you start over and over again. So basically limited reincarnation, not to the point where you're reincarnated as a ladybug, but as other people. So he thought that the soul was immortal, and that children were special because they remembered what it was like to be a part of God. And that the older you get, the less you remember that, and the more you get corrupted. So basically he is very touched and affected by the fact that even though there's this like splendor of nature all around them, which, I mean, that would blow me away too, and he's just like, wow, the kid is just utterly unbothered, and is also utterly unbothered by the fact that he's like, well, I'm your dad. Here I am for the first time. She's completely at peace. She's just bopping along, walking, maybe playing in the sand, totally unbothered. And he says, if you appear untouched by solemn thought, you seem totally nonchalant. You're not affected by the, like, majestic nature that surrounds you. You're not affected by the awkwardness of this situation. You're just, you're above it. And he says, thou liest in Abraham's bosom all the year. You are closer to heaven. God is with you even though we don't know it. So it's this really sweet, thoughtful, loving poem to this child that he never really got to be with, and about how he is so impressed by her peacefulness in the situation. Sometimes kids can be like that. Like, I don't know, sometimes they can like be just totally panicking and like, my stomach hurts and I need you to call my mom and blah, blah, blah. And then sometimes when other people are panicking, kids can be completely fine. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. Some of you know that I started my career teaching first grade and working with early childhood. And I had this one kid who was undiagnosed autistic, and on the first day of school, there's this very specific stuff you were supposed to cover. You're supposed to start like basic geometry and form drawing with lines and curves and stuff. And the kid like got up on his desk and started screaming and throwing things, and he said, you promised me this was going to be about trains. I came here to learn about trains. And this one kid in the back of the room, like the rest of, they were all completely fine. Like none of them, as the teacher, I was just like, good God, what do I do here? And the kids were totally chill about it. And this one kid in the back looks at me and goes, I think that we should call 911. Just like totally unbothered. So this is basically just about kids and how he feels like they have a connection to the divine. I have complex feelings about that, having taught them myself, but so that's just a little bit about Wordsworth. I'm sorry for doing this again in the least professional way possible, but thank you for your time and for your 15 minutes. I'm also going to post later a video about Coleridge, and your discussion prompt for this time is going to come from the Coleridge stuff. So thank you for listening. I hope that you are all having a wonderful day, and that is what you needed to know about William Wordsworth. Have a fabulous rest of your week. Bye-bye.